Hi everyone, Tom Wolf here. In this video, I'm going to be looking at one of my favourite parts of Omnisphere, and that is the Granular engine. If you've watched any of my videos before, you'll notice that I use the Granular engine on a lot. I'm a big fan of granular synthesis, and I own a lot of granular synthesizers. And you know, I think Omnisphere's is just my favourite sounding without a doubt. It has this really kind of smooth quality to it, and it's very kind of diverse as well. So I wanted to dive into that and show you in this tutorial how you can use the Granular engine, and you can take sort of some of the amazing organic sound sources from Omnisphere and run them through the Granular engine and just completely change the sound. Okay, so for this video, I've loaded up a sample from the Omnisphere sound sources called Dark Zimbira Toothbrush, and it sounds like this. Okay, so you can hear it's a very short sound, very organic sounding. It's not got a lot of sustain to it. So let's switch on the Granular engine. Okay, so we can already hear that our sound is changing completely. Okay, so the first section to look at is our waveform here. And this is actually a visual representation of our sample. And when we press a key, you'll notice we get these blue lines, which show us where the individual grains are actually coming from and how quickly it's working. We've also got two different options of processing the grains, and these are both here. So we have speed and we have position. So let's look at speed. Speed basically controls how quickly the grains move throughout the sample. So if we put our slider here, so this slider controls either the speed or the position in the sample. And if we put that all the way to the left, and you can see how quickly the grains are moving here. If we move our slider towards the center, you can see that these grains are moving about a lot more quickly. And you can hear the sound gets just a little bit more intense as well. So the way this slider works as well, it's not one control for speed, so we won't have the fastest all the way over here and the slowest all the way over here. You have the fastest in the center essentially, and then what it does is from this side it works backwards. So if I put it all the way to the right and then play, you can hear that our grains are running backwards now. And then if we move that slider, we're changing the speed of those grains again. And then if we move it into the center, we actually have a mix of grains that go both forwards and backwards, which creates a very cool effect. And you can already hear that we're completely transforming this sound using the Granular engine. We're getting something a lot smoother than the original sound. So we can then change that to position mode. So this, now, the slider will control the position in the sample where we're going to be playing from. So with it all the way to the left, it's going to be playing around here. So you can hear instead of moving around like we were doing in the speed option, it's just kind of taking it from this early point here and recycling the same kind of area as well, which completely changes the characteristics of the sound. We can then adjust the position slider to obviously adjust where in the sample we're going to play. Now, if I move it all the way to the right, in some samples that will move it all the way to the right, but it depends on the actual sample. So if I play this one with the slider all the way to the right, you'll notice we're not getting this area where there's virtually any sound. It's only moved it a little bit, so we've moved away from the initial attack. If I slide this across, you can hear how that changes the sound. So if we want that kind of plucky bit there, we can have it, or we can have it much more smoother by moving the position over here. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the other controls. So we can move this slider all the way back over here because that's going to be the easiest place where we can actually hear the difference from the controls. So the first control we've got is the grain depth. Okay, so let's have a listen to what that does. So if we turn it up, we get more grain sounding. We have a slightly kind of more grainy sound, whereas if we turn it down, we get less grains. You can hear it starts to get louder, but each of the grains is larger, so each of the individual grains has a bit more impact. So you can use that to kind of control almost the blend of the grains. So if you want something that sounds very granular, then you probably want the grain depth quite low. Whereas if you want something a little bit smoother and a little bit more controlled, then you're going to have the grain depth higher. So then we've got the intensity as well. So let's play about with that. So at the moment we've got quite a low intensity. We can turn that up. And you can see our grains get shorter and shorter. So we could then change the position to get a very different sound. And we can go even more intense if we want. Or of course, drop it back, which again, we get a kind of smoother, softer sound from that. We've then got a smoothing control, which basically balances the different grains and makes it sound smoother. So where it's cut up the different grains, naturally they're going to sound at different volumes because it's taking the grain from different parts in this sound source, which are either going to be louder, quieter, all this kind of stuff. And the smoothing allows us to smooth that out so that the volumes are the same and it sounds a bit more like one sound. Whereas if we have zero smoothing, it's going to sound a lot more grainy. So let's try that. So there we go. All the way to 0. We've got quite a kind of distorted almost sound. A little bit white noisy. And then we can turn the smoothing up. And it almost sounds like we're getting less grains there, because they're just a bit more smoothed out and kind of blending together a bit more. So then we've got a spread control as well, and the spread is basically the stereo image. So if we have the spread all the way up, it's going to be panning the different grains in the stereo spectrum, whereas if we have that down to 0, it's all going to be in the center. So let's just hear that. So that's full stereo, so if you've got headphones on, you can hear that now. And now all the grains are sounding down the center, so it gives it a bit more kind of bit more of an interesting stereo effect having it up here. So then the controls we've got are detuning, and it's to do with the actual tuning of the grains. Okay, so let's change this sound slightly. Let's smooth it out a little bit more. Okay, so at the moment we've got the detuning set to 0. So if we turn that up, it's basically going to detune each of the grains slightly against each other and create this kind of interesting pitching effect. And the more we turn up the detuning, the more pitch mod there's going to be, the more the grains are going to detune. So let's just add that in. So now you can really hear it working. And all the different grains are just going to different pitches, and you can get some really weird kind of effects with that. Then we've also got a grain pitching. So we can set the interval that we're going to be pitching the grains by with the interval control. At the moment it's set to the maximum, which is 12 semitones, but if you wanted to create a kind of chord type thing, you could do. I'm going to set it to 12 for the moment. And then the pitch grains control basically just controls how much of it is going to be brought into the sound. So you can now hear we've got that octave coming in. And the more we turn that up, the more of the grains are actually going to be pitched. At the moment, we've also got this gliding control on as well. So what that controls is the glide between the original pitch and the pitched grains. So if we have the glide up high, we actually end up with, this kind of, it's almost like a kind of portamento control on a synth, where the actual grains of the sound are going to kind of pitch while we're playing, and we're going to get some kind of pitch sweeps in that sound. You can hear that happening already. So if we turn the glide down, it's going to go straight to that pitch, and we're not going to hear that gliding sound. So it kind of is a little bit smoother then. So that's nice to just kind of blend in a little bit of pitch to it. Okay, and of course, as I say, we can change the intervals too. So say we wanted a fifth. That's quite nice. So of course we can pick any interval that we want. We can create some really weird dissonant kind of stuff as well, which is cool. And we can go anywhere from 1 semitone to 12 semitones with that pitching. Okay, so we can also control the direction of the pitching, and we have a mode control as well. So the amount of pitching is going to be controlled by this, and we'll look at that in just a second, but we'll look at the direction. So at the moment when we play our sound, we've got it set to 12. You can hear we're getting an octave up. Okay, so this changes the direction of the pitch, and we can have it going an octave down. We can have it going up or down, which basically means that at any one time it's either going to be pitching upwards or it's going to be pitching downwards, but it's not going to be pitching both at the same time. So we can hear that happening. And then we've got up and down, which basically means it's going to be pitching both at the same time. So we're going to get, if we've got it set to an octave, we're basically going to get an octave below and an octave up, as well as our original note at the same time. So we're getting quite a wide kind of spread there. So then let's leave it on up and down, and we'll change the mode to wild mode. So when we choose that wild mode, you can hear that we're actually getting a much more kind of, there we are, adventurous pitching. Instead of just that kind of bread and butter octave, we're adding a lot of other notes into it as well, and it creates this pretty cool effect, which can be quite useful. We just play across a few octaves, getting all different kinds of notes in there, which is just adding kind of another interesting character to the sound. So the last control that we're going to look at is the actual type of mode of the Granular engine. So I'm going to remove some of the pitching for this one. Okay, so you'll see this button, the legacy button over here. So the Granular engine that we're using at the moment is the one that was in Omnisphere 2, and obviously still exists in the synths, but they changed it between Omnisphere 1 and Omnisphere 2, and it gave it a different kind of characteristic. And we are still able to go back to the version from Omnisphere 1 using the legacy button. So all this basically does is it just changes how the Granular engine works beneath the surface, and it gives us a kind of slower, I guess kind of almost more subtle, but sounds a bit slower and a bit more kind of glitchy. Let's switch that on so you can hear that. So this is it without the legacy mode on. And then we'll put the legacy mode on. So the grains are obviously happening a lot slower. And we can almost kind of hear where it changes between the grains. So it works really well for creating kind of textures and stuff that you want to be kind of continuously changing. And we can obviously put that in speed mode as well. And again, we can still kind of hear where those grains actually change in legacy mode. So that's just a way of, alternating the character as well. So both can be useful for certain situations and certain things that you want to do within the Granular engine. So that is how the Granular engine works in Omnisphere and how you can control it. But how can we kind of use this in practice when we're creating tracks? Well, we can use it for all different kinds of things. We can use it to sort of smooth out sounds, like as I've showed in this, we started with a kind of percussive short sound, and then by using the Granular engine we've turned it into something a bit smoother, a bit more sustainy. We can also use it to create some textures. We can create it short sounds. We can use it to create all these different kinds of things, but it has this really nice character to it which can really add something to our sounds. So let's just show you really quickly how we can kind of create a pad just out of this one sound source here. Okay, so if we switch our Granular engine off again, okay, so again we've just got that kind of clicky sound there, organic sound. Let's turn the envelope, attack and release up, and then let's switch the Granular engine on. Let's take it off legacy mode. I'm going to set it to position so there's nice and smooth. Don't want any pitch on it. Relatively smooth. Grain depth up relatively high and the intensity relatively low. So we've already got a kind of paddy type sound. You can hear we've got that kind of clicky bit, which we can get rid of that by changing the position, because that's where it's kind of sounding near the attack. So now we're getting this really kind of natural, deep, almost glassy kind of pad sound. And then of course we could do other things to it, like for instance we could add some precision comp to just smooth it out a little bit. Just the volume there. And then let's put a bit of reverb on that. So now we've got this really kind of atmospheric pad just from that one sound source and running it through the Granular engine. Okay, so there you have Omnisphere's Granular engine, and we've also seen how you can kind of use that in practice as well. Play about with it, try different sound sources, try different settings in the Granular engine, and see what kinds of sounds you can come up with, because it's a really useful tool that can give you some very unique sounds. Thank you for watching the video. If you did enjoy it and you want to learn more about sound design, there's a link in the description which will take you to my website, and you can sign up for weekly free sound design tutorials, which is a fantastic thing to do if you want to kind of just do a little bit a week and sort of improve your sound design through these short weekly videos. Thank you for watching the video, and until next time, take care.